I stood there clutching the program for the Man of the Year award, and my $4,000 dress felt like a straitjacket. The spotlights found my husband, David, as he glad-handed billionaires. When he finally saw me, his smile vanished. He stormed over, his face a mask of fury, and hissed, "For God's sake, Grace, can you at least try to look like you're proud of me? This is my night. Don't ruin it with your grieving." He was right. It was his night. The night I'd spent 3 months planning just for him. He just had no idea what the main event would be. But that explosion, under the chandeliers and in front of Denver's elite, was just the final crack in a foundation that had been crumbling for months. To understand how we got there, we need to go back to the day my father died. My father died on a Tuesday. I remember the smell of the funeral home, that heavy, thick scent of lilies and dust. I remember the feel of David's hand on the small of my back, guiding me, steering me through the crowd of black-clad well-wishers. He was a perfect host, even at my father's funeral. He was handling it. He handled my aunt's flight from Orlando, he handled the catering for the reception, and he handled me. Back at our house, he brought me a glass of water I hadn't asked for, his expression a perfect mask of concerned, competent grief. "Honey," he said, his voice low and practiced, "I know this is the last thing on your mind, but we need to talk about the estate." The last thing on my mind? My mind wasn't even there. It was somewhere else entirely. It was back in the warm, flour-dusted air of my bakery, Miller Artisan. It was just 6 months before. I was pulling a tray of baguettes from the steam-injected oven, the crusts crackling like a fireplace. My dad, a big bear of a man with flour in his gray beard, was leaning against the stainless steel counter. He picked up a croissant, flaky layers shattering as he bit into it. "This, kiddo," he said, pointing with the half-eaten pastry, "is world-class. This hobby of yours," he used air quotes, mocking the word David always used, "is going to make you famous." "It's not a hobby, Dad," I'd laughed. "It's a business." "I know it is, that's why I'm investing in it." My dad was old school. He'd built his construction business from nothing, with a handshake and an ironclad reputation. He understood building things. He understood my bakery because it was real. It wasn't numbers on a screen. It was chemistry and patience. It was our sourdough starter, the heirloom, which his own grandmother had brought over from the old country. It was a living thing, a legacy. It required feeding, attention, and work. You couldn't fake a good sourdough. David never got it. To him, my 16-hour days, my meticulous temperature charts, my custom-milled rye flour, it was all just a cute little hobby, something to keep me busy while he did real work. His world was wealth management. It was fast, abstract, and, to me, hollow. He managed portfolios and assets and high-yield funds. He didn't build anything you could touch. "Grace, did you hear me?" David's voice snapped me back to the living room, to the smell of lilies and catered mini-quiches. He was kneeling in front of me, his expression earnest. He looked like an actor in a movie about a sad, supportive husband. "I know how hard this is for you," he said, taking my hand. His was warm, mine was ice. "You're drowning, and I'm not going to let you worry about the logistics. The inheritance, the estate taxes, your dad's portfolio. It's a mess. It's too much for you right now." I just nodded, my throat too tight to speak. "So, I've already spoken to our lawyer," he continued. "So efficient. We're going to move everything into a new trust, the Miller Family Trust. It's the smartest play. It protects you. It protects us. I'm a professional, Grace. It's what I do. I can grow this. I can make it work for us, make it something your dad would be even more proud of. I will take care of everything." He was so reasonable, so caring. He was using the language of protection, of partnership. He was wrapping his arms around me. Or was he putting me in a cage? Even then, through the fog of grief, a tiny, cold part of my brain whispered, my dad's finances weren't a mess. He was meticulous. He had his own accountant. He had his own lawyer. But I was so tired. I was so broken. The man I loved was offering to carry the load. He was offering to take the wheel while I fell apart in the passenger seat, so I let him. "Here," he said softly, pulling a set of neatly stapled documents from his briefcase, which was already sitting by his feet. "Ready. Just sign here and here." It's just to give me authority to consolidate the assets, to protect you. I looked at the signature line. I thought of my dad. I thought of his calloused hands, stained with wood varnish and engine grease, patting me on the back. "You're the builder, kiddo," he'd said. "Not him, you." But I picked up the pen. David gently guided my hand to the right spot. I signed away my father's legacy, the construction business he'd bled for, the stocks he'd saved, the money he had earmarked for my business. I signed it all over to the man who called my life's work a hobby. David kissed my forehead. "There," he whispered. "All taken care of. You don't have to think about a single thing. I've got you." As he walked away to refresh an elderly aunt's drink, I just sat there. I felt hollowed out. I told myself it was the grief, but it wasn't. It was the first cold chill of the greatest mistake of my life. Grief, I've learned, is a fog. It's dense and disorienting, and it's amazing what kind of snakes can crawl into your house while you're not watching. And the snake in my house didn't rattle. It just coiled, quietly, for 2 more months. The fog of grief started to lift, but it left behind this low, damp chill. I threw myself into the bakery. I worked until my hands ached and my back screamed. My dad's sourdough starter, the heirloom, was my anchor. Feeding it every day, watching it bubble and rise, smelling that sharp, tangy, alive scent, it was the only thing that felt real. My numbers were good. We were selling out by 10 a.m. every day. I was hiring 2 new bakers. I was building something. Then came tax season. I was in our small home office, the one tucked away in the guest room, while David had his gleaming corner office downtown with a view of the mountains. I was trying to find the profit and loss statements for the bakery. David had helpfully organized all our finances onto our shared cloud drive. I clicked through folders. Household, taxes 2024, David, portfolio, and then Grace, hobby. I just stared at that folder name. Hobby. My hobby was about to post a 6-figure net profit. My hobby paid for this house's utilities. I clicked it. Inside, he'd misfiled all my invoices. My hands tightened on the mouse until my knuckles went white. I took a deep breath. He's just organizing, Grace. He thinks in categories. But it was in that moment, annoyed and clicking around, that I saw it. Tucked at the bottom of the directory, not filed under finances or taxes at all. A separate folder. Project Elevate. I frowned. It wasn't one of our shared folders. It was David's. But it wasn't locked. He must have saved it to the root drive by mistake. I figured it was just more of his work charts and projections that made my eyes glaze over. But I needed a distraction from the hobby folder, so I clicked it. It wasn't stock charts. It was invoices, scanned receipts, wire transfer confirmations. My heart didn't pound. It just stopped. It went cold. I opened the first file. A wire transfer. $50,000. It wasn't from his business account. It was from the Miller Family Trust. My trust. My dad's money. The recipient wasn't Vanguard or Fidelity. It was an LLC I'd never heard of. Apex Solutions Group. I clicked the next file. Another wire transfer. $25,000. And another. $75,000. And another. I scrolled, my vision narrowing. The files went on. Invoices for consulting fees, receipts for a custom sound system, a down payment on a lease for a high-end office space. This wasn't an investment. This was spending. My breath hitched. The room felt suddenly airless. The grief that had been a warm, smothering blanket was suddenly gone, ripped away, leaving me exposed and freezing. The snake was rattling. I sat there for an hour, just clicking, downloading, copying everything to a USB drive I kept hidden in an old tin of baking powder. I was methodical. I was calm. The baker in me took over. Follow the recipe. Don't panic. Check the variables. When David came home that night, I was on the sofa, pretending to read a magazine. He threw his keys in the bowl by the door. That familiar clink of metal on ceramic. "Hey," he said, already unbuttoning his cuffs. "Long day." "The market's a mess." He didn't look at me. He was already scrolling through his phone. "David." My voice was perfectly level. I was in the cloud drive today, getting the bakery's tax stuff. "Yeah? Hope you found everything." I spent a whole weekend organizing that for you. I did. I saw a folder. Project Elevate. I must have opened it by accident. What is it? Is it one of your new funds? He finally looked up. His smile was instant, bright, charming, and utterly dismissive. He laughed, a warm, condescending chuckle. Oh, that? You found my secret weapon, he said, walking over. He sat on the coffee table in front of me. That, my dear, is our future. It looked like invoices, I said, my heart a cold stone in my chest. Exactly. It's a high-yield development fund. Elevate. Smart. Right. He was so proud of himself. It's an incubator for a few tech startups. The invoices are just capital buy-ins. It's complicated. Way too boring for you. He was lying. It was so smooth, so easy, like he'd practiced it, like he'd been waiting for me to ask. It's how I'm growing your inheritance, Grace, just like I promised. It's already up 12%. He leaned in, his voice dropping to that intimate, protective tone he'd used at the funeral. It's what your dad would have wanted. He wanted you to be taken care of. And then he did it. He reached out and patted me. Twice. On the top of my head, like a golden retriever that had successfully fetched a ball. Don't you stress your pretty head about it, he said, standing up. That's my job. Now, what's for dinner? I'm starving. I just smiled. It was a perfect, brittle, empty smile. I'll go check, I said. He walked into the kitchen, and I heard the refrigerator open. I sat there, the magazine heavy in my lap. The man who just patted me on the head was stealing from me. He was stealing my father's legacy, the one he'd promised to protect, and he was using my own grief as a smokescreen. He thought I was the hobbyist. He thought I was the fragile wife. He thought I was too stupid to read an invoice. That night, I didn't sleep. I went to the bakery at 3 a.m. I turned on the lights, the fluorescent bulbs humming in the silence. I went to the big stainless steel tub where the heirloom lived. I lifted the lid. That familiar, tangy scent filled my lungs. It was real. It was honest. I measured the flour. I measured the water. I fed the starter. And as I stirred, I made a promise to my dad. He thinks I'm just a baker, I thought, the wooden spoon scraping the side of the tub. He forgot what baking is. It's just chemistry and math. It's patience. It's precision. And it's knowing exactly when to turn up the heat. But I also knew you don't rush proofing. You let the dough develop. You let the gluten strengthen. You wait for the exact right moment. So I waited. But I didn't sleep. Not really. For the next 3 nights, I'd go to bed, lie perfectly still until David's breathing evened out into a deep, untroubled sleep, the sleep of a man with no conscience, and then I would slip out. I'd go to the cold guest room, lock the door, and plug in the USB drive. That little piece of plastic had become my entire world. David's lie about Project Elevate was too slick. It's what your dad would have wanted, the arrogance of that line. It was a hook that had snagged deep in my gut, and I couldn't stop pulling at it. He was so confident I was a fool. So sure I'd just see the big words and the dollar signs and be a good, pretty-headed girl. He'd forgotten I ran a business. He'd forgotten that my father didn't raise me to be pretty. He raised me to be competent. I didn't just look at the invoices. I started to build a spreadsheet. I was a baker after all. I knew that the process was everything. The timing, the order of operations. I entered every line item, every date, every amount, every recipient, Apex Solutions Group, Elevation Consulting, Reed Advisory. All of them were shell companies, I was sure of it. All registered in Delaware or Nevada, all paper thin. I sorted the spreadsheet. I sorted by amount. I sorted by recipient. And then, I sorted by date. The room was ice cold. The only light was the blue glow of the laptop screen. I saw the most recent transfer, from last week, then the one before. I scrolled up, back in time, back through the months, back to when the fog of grief had been at its thickest. And then I saw it, the first one. The one that had opened the account. The one that had started this entire, secret, second life. David was living with my father's money. It was the largest transfer of them all. $250,000. My hand was trembling so hard I could barely control the trackpad. The date was August 14th. I stopped. I couldn't breathe. My heart, which had been so cold and methodical, suddenly felt like it was being squeezed in a fist. August 14th. I didn't need to check my calendar, but I did. I pulled up my iCal. The date was blocked out in gray, a single awful entry. Dad's service, 2 p.m. I looked back at the wire transfer. The PDF scan was perfect. David was nothing if not thorough. He had kept his receipts. And right there, in the top corner of the bank confirmation, was the digital timestamp. Sent, August 14, 2:17 p.m. The spreadsheet, the numbers, the lies. They all dissolved. All I could see was that time. 2:17 p.m. I was at the funeral home. I was standing at a wooden podium that smelled like lemon polish and old hymnals. I was looking out at a sea of faces, my aunt, my dad's construction crew in their stiff, uncomfortable suits. I was trying to read the Robert Frost poem my dad had loved, the one he'd framed and put in his office, The Road Not Taken. My hands were shaking. The paper was rattling so loudly I couldn't hear my own voice. I was choking on the words. My aunt had to come up, put her arm around my waist, and hold the paper steady for me. 2:17 p.m. While I was eulogizing my father, while my heart was shattering into a million pieces in front of a room full of witnesses, David was somewhere. He was in the back pew. He was in the church lobby. Maybe he'd stepped out to take a call. He was on his phone. His thumb was tapping on a screen. He was approving a wire transfer. He was moving $250,000 of my father's money into a bank account for a company that didn't exist. The pat on the head. Don't stress your pretty head about it. The nausea was so sudden, so violent, that I barely made it to the guest bathroom. I knelt on the cold tile, heaving, but nothing came up. There was just this acidic, burning rage that filled my throat. This wasn't just theft. This wasn't just a high-yield fund or a bad investment. This was a desecration. He had stood next to me at the casket, holding my hand, his face a mask of sorrow. And he'd been calculating. He had waited for the single most vulnerable moment of my life, the moment I was literally paralyzed by grief, to make his first move. I gripped the edge of the toilet, my knuckles white. The fragile wife, the hobbyist baker, the poor, grieving daughter. It was all a convenience for him. My pain was his cover. I splashed cold water on my face. I looked at the woman in the mirror. Her eyes weren't puffy from crying anymore. They were red. They were sharp. They were clear. The fog was gone. I went back to the laptop. The ice was back, but it wasn't in my hands. It was in my veins. I opened a new folder on the USB drive. A new master spreadsheet. This one wasn't for taxes. This one wasn't for discovery. This one was for evidence. He thought I was the road not taken. He thought I was the easy, predictable, safe path he could just ignore. He had no idea. I wasn't the road. I was the one holding the map, and I was about to draw him right off a cliff. Drawing him off a cliff, I realized, didn't require a push. It just required a map of his own path, laid out for everyone to see. And the first step on any map is follow the money. I couldn't use our joint accounts for this. I couldn't risk him seeing a charge. So I did the one thing he would never think to check. I used the money from my hobby. I went to the bakery's business account, the one I had built from zero, the one flush with cash from selling out of sourdough and croissants every single day, and I made a withdrawal. A big one. I didn't hire a private investigator. This wasn't a jealous wife looking for pictures in a motel kind of problem. This was a business problem. So I hired a professional. A forensic accountant named Mr. Klein, a grizzled, no-nonsense man who looked more like a tired bloodhound than a numbers guy. He didn't have a fancy office, just a cluttered one in a strip mall that smelled like stale coffee. I didn't tell him my life story. I didn't cry. I just handed him the USB drive. This is a list of wire transfers from a trust I am the beneficiary of. The man in charge of the trust claims it's a high-yield fund. I believe he's lying. I want to know who Apex Solutions Group and Reed Advisory really are. I want to know where every single dollar ended up. Klein just grunted, plugging the drive into his old desktop tower. Give me 72 hours. He called me in 48. Well, it's not a what, he said, his voice gravelly over the phone. It's a who. Apex and Reed and 2 other shells you didn't even catch are all registered to the same person. They're just layered, one on top of the other, like a bad casserole. All leads back to one name. I was standing in my bakery's stockroom, a 50-pound bag of flour at my feet. Who? A Dr. Elena Reed. My hand tightened on the phone. Elena Reed? The Elena Reed? I mean, in Denver she was practically a celebrity. Are you sure? I asked. Dr. Elena Reed, from the Denver Empowerment Fund. Don't know about no empowerment fund, Klein grumbled. I just know the LLCs are registered to her. The money is being funneled into her accounts, and from there it's being spent. Fast. A new lease on a high-rise office, a lot of high-end catering, and a down payment on a corporate condo in Vail. You want the full report? Yes, I said, my voice barely a whisper. Send it. I hung up and leaned against the flour sacks. My hobby just paid for the ammunition that would win me a war. I went to my office and locked the door. I Googled her. The screen exploded with her face. There she was, on the cover of Denver Business Journal, The Woman Rebuilding Our City. There she was on LinkedIn, her profile a masterpiece of corporate buzzwords, synergizing philanthropy and empowerment for Denver's future. Her entire brand was based on integrity, on helping women. She was the queen of the non-profit elite, and she was robbing me blind. But why, David? How did my husband, a mid-level wealth manager, get tangled up with a local powerhouse like Elena? I found my answer on Instagram. Her profile was public, of course. It had to be. It was part of her brand. It was a perfectly curated feed of charity galas, inspirational quotes, and humble brags. I scrolled and scrolled. Back, back. And then I found it. A photo from 6 months ago. Elena, arm in arm with David. They were at a fundraising breakfast. David was beaming at her, a look of pure, unadulterated adoration on his face, the kind of look he used to give me. The caption, so incredibly proud of my brilliant mentee and friend David Miller, his generous and anonymous. Support for the fund is going to change so many lives. I felt the blood drain from my face. Mentee. Anonymous support. My inheritance. My money. He was giving her my money, and she was praising him for it. I scrolled further, my thumb moving mechanically. Photo after photo. Elena at a podium, Elena cutting a ribbon, and then another man. He was older, distinguished, with a head of silver fox hair and an expensive-looking watch. He was in at least half the photos, his arm possessively around Elena's waist. The caption on one read, "My rock, my love, my biggest supporter. So lucky to be on this journey with my fiancé, Mark." Fiancé. A cold, sick feeling washed over me. This was more complicated. This wasn't a simple, grubby affair. I wasn't a fool. I opened a new tab. I typed, Mark Donovan, Denver. My world tilted. Mark Donovan wasn't just some rich fiancé. He was the Mark Donovan, the real estate mogul, the man whose name was on half the new skyscrapers in the city. And I clicked the first link, his corporate bio. He was the founder and the chairman of the board of the Denver Empowerment Fund. I leaned back in my chair, the screen blurring. I finally saw the whole picture. It wasn't just a map. It was a blueprint. Elena was sleeping with my husband. She was engaged to her boss. She was using David, her mentee, as her inside man. He was her little tool. He had control of my trust, my inheritance, and he was funneling it to her charity, which she and her fiancé ultimately controlled. They were laundering my father's legacy. This wasn't just an affair. This was a business plan, and they were using my inheritance as venture capital. This was my inheritance, my father's life's work, reduced to venture capital for a pair of high society sociopaths. I spent the next 2 days in a blur of spreadsheets and databases. I printed every invoice from the USB drive. I printed Elena's gushing Instagram posts. I printed the corporate registration for the Empowerment Fund, with Mark Donovan listed as chairman. I printed the wire transfer showing the $250,000 sent while I was at my father's podium. I was no longer a baker. I was a prosecutor building a case. I kept everything in a locked, fire-safe box I'd bought at Costco, hidden under a stack of old towels in the linen closet. I was so deep in this new, cold world that I almost forgot to play the part of the grieving wife. I was in the kitchen, staring at a pot of water that refused to boil, when David came home. I didn't hear him park. I just heard the front door burst open with a kind of manic energy I hadn't seen in months. He wasn't just walking in, he was making an entrance. "Grace, Grace, where are you? You are not going to believe this." He appeared in the kitchen doorway, his face flushed with a victory so bright it was almost grotesque. He was vibrating with excitement. He looked, I realized with a cold shock, happy, truly, genuinely happy. Not the concerned husband performance he'd been giving me, but a raw, unfiltered joy. "What is it, David?" I asked, turning from the stove. "It's the gala. The Empowerment Fund annual ball. Honey, they're honoring me." He strode over, grabbing me by the waist and lifting me in a theatrical spin. I was so stunned, I just went limp. He set me down, his hands gripping my shoulders. "They're naming me Philanthropist of the Year," he beamed. "Can you believe it? Me. I could. Oh yes, I could. The anonymous donor was getting his prize. He was getting his name in the paper, his picture on the Jumbotron, all for the low, low price of his wife's inheritance. David, that's... I searched for the word. Incredible. Isn't it? He was pacing the kitchen now, a ball of energy. "Elena, Dr. Reed called me personally," she said. "She said the board was blown away by our anonymous support. She said our contribution has been a game changer, that it's funding 3 new women's shelters." The lie was so beautiful, so perfectly constructed. He was a hero. He was saving battered women by stealing from his grieving wife. The hypocrisy was a physical thing, pressing the air out of my lungs. She said that," I managed. "Yes, she's amazing, Grace, just a force of nature. This is just the beginning. This puts us in a whole new circle. A whole new world. Us." He kept using that word. "Our support, our contribution, us." He was trying to make me his accomplice. He was forcing me to celebrate the crime. This was the arrogance trap, and it was closing around me. He wasn't just satisfied with stealing the money, he needed the public applause for it too. And he needed me, his supportive wife, standing right next to him, smiling and nodding. "Wow," I said. "When is it?" 2 weeks, he said. "And that's the other thing. I know you. Well, I know you haven't been feeling like yourself. And this is a very high-profile black tie thing. I mean, everyone is going to be there. Mark Donovan, the mayor, everyone." He was looking at me now, with that same practiced, caring expression, the one that meant he was about to pat me on the head. "I need you to look the part, Grace," he said, his voice dropping. "I need you to be present. For me, for us." "Of course, David," I said, my voice a perfect, soft, wifely monotone. "Good, great. In fact," his face lit up again, "I already took care of it." He dashed out to the hall and came back holding a long, black garment bag from Neiman Marcus. It was the kind of bag I'd only ever seen in magazines. "What's this?" "This," he said, puffing his chest out, "is for you. I know you don't have anything appropriate for this kind of event. All your, he gestured vaguely, as if to encompass my entire life of flour-dusted jeans and comfortable sweaters. He hung the bag from the top of the pantry door and unzipped it with a flourish. Inside was a dress. It was stunning. A deep, emerald green silk that shimmered under the kitchen lights. It was elegant, severe, and looked impossibly expensive. "David," I whispered. "I had Elena's personal shopper pick it out for you," he said, beaming. "Elena knows the designer personally. She said this color would be perfect for you." My blood didn't just run cold. It froze. It turned to absolute zero. His mistress, his co-conspirator, the woman who was stealing my father's money, picked out my dress. She was dressing me, like a doll, a prop for their little play. I could just hear them, laughing about it over cocktails in their stolen office. "Oh, get her the green one. It'll match her naivety. She'll be so grateful, the poor thing." I reached out, my hand trembling, and touched the fabric. It was heavy silk. It felt like armor. "It's beautiful," I said. The words tasted like ash. "Only the best," he said, puffing his chest out. It's couture, but this is the big leagues, honey. We have to look the part." I let my fingers slide down the dress, down to the sleeve, where the white price tag was still hanging, neatly tucked inside. I didn't mean to look, but my fingers found it. I turned it over. $4,800. $4,800. That was a new convection oven for the bakery. That was 2 months' payroll for my new bakers. That was my money. He had bought me a dress with my own stolen inheritance, a costume, selected by his partner in crime, for me to wear as I watched him be celebrated for the theft. I looked at the dress, and then I looked at him. He was standing there, smiling, so proud of his own generosity, so blinded by his own arrogance that he couldn't see the woman in front of him at all. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at a hobbyist, a fragile widow, a prop he could dress up and stand next to him on his big night. He had no idea he was standing in a room with a forensic scientist. I slowly, carefully zipped the garment bag back up. The sound was loud, like a blade sharpening in the quiet kitchen. "Thank you, David," I said, and my voice was perfectly steady. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," he said, kissing my forehead. The kiss felt like a spider. "Just try to be happy for me, okay? This is a big deal." He walked away, whistling, pulling his phone out to text someone no doubt, to tell her the doll had accepted the dress. I stood there, my hand on the garment bag. I would wear the dress. I would wear the $4,800 dress bought with my father's money. I would stand next to him. I would smile for the cameras. But it wouldn't be my costume. It would be my uniform. He had just given me the perfect armor for the battle to come, and he'd given me the location, the Empowerment Fund annual ball. He was handing me the stage, the audience, and the spotlight. He wasn't just inviting me to his party, he was inviting me to his execution. And I was, for the first time in months, actually looking forward to it. An execution, I knew, required more than just a stage. David and Elena were insulated. They were wrapped in the Teflon coating of high society philanthropy. Even with my evidence, I was just a grieving wife, a baker. If I stood up and screamed, they would call security. I would be the crazy one. Elena's power came from her brand, but her protection came from Mark Donovan. He was her fiancé, her boss, and the chairman of the board. He was her human shield. To get to her, I had to get through him. But I couldn't just call his office. "Hi, your fiancé is sleeping with my husband and stealing my inheritance." I'd be dismissed in a heartbeat, labeled a woman scorned, and he would circle the wagons around Elena so fast I'd get whiplash. I had to get to him on his own terms, as a professional. So I used the very thing they all underestimated, my hobby. I went online and found the vendor packet for the Empowerment Fund Gala. The catering bid was still open. I spent the next 48 hours not just baking, but compiling the most beautiful, professional, and expensive catering proposal you have ever seen. Miller Artisan Bakery and Kitchen, a curated culinary experience. I used my graphic design skills from college. I included glossy photos of my pastries, tiered towers of artisanal breads, sample menus with wine pairings, glowing testimonials from local food critics, and a full profit and loss statement showing my bakery's profitability. I wasn't a hobbyist. I was a 6-figure business owner. I sent it to the gala committee. The call came 2 days later. An assistant. "Miss Miller, Dr. Reed is swamped, but she was impressed with your portfolio and has forwarded your bid to our chairman, Mr. Donovan. He has final approval on all major vendors. He can give you 10 minutes on Thursday." Bingo. Elena, in her supreme arrogance, had just handed me a loaded gun. She was too busy, too important to meet with the catering, so she'd helpfully forwarded me to the one man I needed to see. His office was on the 50th floor of the Donovan Tower. It was less an office and more a glass box in the sky, with a floor-to-ceiling, 180-degree view of the Rocky Mountains. It was a king-of-the-world view. The art on the walls was stark, modern, and probably cost more than my father's entire construction company. Mark Donovan was exactly as he looked in his photos. Silver hair, impeccable suit, an aura of absolute, crushing power. He was sitting behind a glass desk so large and empty it looked like a frozen lake. He didn't stand up when I walked in. He just nodded to a chair and continued scrolling through a tablet. "Miss Miller," he said, his voice bored. He hadn't looked up. "I'm tight on time." My assistant said, "You're here about the gala catering." He thought I was the help. He was the king, and I was just another vendor to be processed before his 2 p.m. meeting. The disrespect was so thick I could smell it. I didn't open the beautiful leather-bound catering proposal on my lap. I just sat there, my hands folded, and waited. The silence stretched. 1 second. 2. Finally, annoyed, he looked up from his tablet. "No, Mr. Donovan," I said, my voice perfectly calm and level. "I'm not here to bid on the catering." His eyebrows furrowed. "Then you're wasting my time." "I'm here," I said, as the fund's anonymous donor. That got his full attention. His hand stopped scrolling. He put the tablet down on the glass desk with a soft click. His eyes, which had been dismissive and gray, were now sharp and blue. "That's a significant claim," he said slowly. "That donation was made privately, by Dr. Reed's mentee, David Miller." "It was," I said, "by my husband, with my money." I reached into my bag and pulled out, not the catering bid, but a simple, thick manila folder, the one from my fire-safe box. I slid it across the vast glass desk. It felt so small, so insignificant in that temple of power. "This," I said, "is my father's inheritance, the one he left me when he passed away 3 months ago. He's a businessman. He understands numbers." He opened the folder. He saw the bank statements. He saw the Miller Family Trust at the top. And he saw the wire transfers. $250,000, he read aloud, his voice flat. He looked at the date. "The day of my father's funeral," I supplied, sent while I was giving his eulogy. I let that hang in the air. "I'm not a lawyer, Mr. Donovan," I continued, "but I'm a quick study. And this looks a lot like conspiracy to commit wire fraud. Your fiancé, Dr. Reed, has been conspiring with my husband, David, to systematically embezzle my father's estate and launder it through your foundation into her shell companies." He slammed the folder shut. The sound was like a gunshot in the sterile office. "This is an outrageous accusation," he snapped. "Do you have any idea who you're talking to? Who you're accusing?" "I do," I said, holding his gaze. "Elena Reed is a pillar of this community. She is my fiancée." He spat the word. "And you walk in here, a baker, and accuse her of being a criminal? This is libel." He was angry, but it was the manufactured anger of a man whose perfect world had just been threatened. He was trying to put me back in my box, the fragile wife, the hobbyist. "I am," I said. "And she is. But you and I both know that's not what this is really about. The theft. That's just business. This," I said, "is about respect." I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small, digital voice recorder. The $40 one I'd bought at an office supply store. "I left this in my living room," I said. "They got careless. They started talking business at my house. They started celebrating." I pressed play. The tiny speaker filled the vast, silent office. First, David's voice, thick with laughter. "God, she's just so fragile. She's a mess, still crying about her dad. She hasn't looked at a bank statement in months. She just signs what I tell her to sign. It's perfect." Mark Donovan's face went white. He'd been played too. Then, Elena's voice. That smooth, confident, charitable voice that wooed donors. "It's fine, baby, she's a non-issue. We just have to keep the Philanthropist of the Year narrative going. It's the perfect cover." David's voice again. "What about Mark? He's the chairman. Doesn't he see the books?" And then, the line that sealed my alliance. The line that I knew would turn this mogul into my weapon. Elena's laugh. A light, airy, tinkling sound. The sound of pure contempt. "Mark? Oh, please. Mark is so distracted by his new high-rise build, he wouldn't notice if I set the building on fire. He just signs what I tell him to sign. He's so busy playing king of the city he forgot who really runs the castle." I pressed stop. The silence in the room was absolute. The only sound was the faint, high-altitude wind whistling against the 50th floor window. Mark Donovan stared at the small, cheap recorder on his billion-dollar desk. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at his own reflection in the glass. He had been played. He was the one they were patting on the head. He was the non-issue. Slowly, deliberately, he picked up his desk phone. He buzzed his assistant. "Susan," he said, his voice a low, cold monotone I hadn't heard before. Cancel my 3 o'clock. And get my personal security team to my office. Now, he hung up. He finally looked at me. The anger was gone. All that was left was ice. The same ice that was in my veins. Miss Miller, he said. What, exactly, do you want? I want my money back, I said. With interest. And I want them to pay. Not just with money. I want them ruined. I want their names taken from them. And I'm going to do it. At the gala. In 2 weeks, he nodded once. A sharp, reptilian movement. How? I'm going to let them give David his award. I'm going to let them stand on that stage, in front of the mayor and the entire city, and tell everyone what heroes they are. A slow, terrible smile spread across his face. He understood. And then, I said, I'm going to change the speech on the teleprompter. You'll need access to the AV booth, he said. It wasn't a question. I will, I said. And you'll need witnesses who aren't just donors. You'll need law enforcement. This can't look like a personal vendetta. I was thinking the Denver DAS white-collar crime unit would be very interested in the contents of that folder, I said. He picked up the phone again. Susan, get me the district attorney on his private line. Tell him, it's a personal matter regarding the empowerment fund. He hung up and looked at me, a newfound, chilling respect in his eyes. You're not a baker, Miss Miller. No, Mr. Donovan, I said, standing up. I zipped my bag, leaving the manila folder on his desk. I left the catering proposal there, too. But, I added, pausing at the door, if you still need someone for the gala, my croissants are the best in the city. I'll be there anyway. And I was there, 2 weeks later, as promised. The ballroom at the Hyatt was a sea of black ties and sequins. The noise was deafening, 1,000 people laughing, networking, and drinking champagne that cost more per bottle than my first car. The air smelled thick with expensive perfume and roast beef. I wore the dress, the emerald green silk armor. It felt custom-made for this moment. And over in the corner, by the silent auction tables, was the most magnificent dessert display you have ever seen. A tower of my croissants, pastries, and artisanal breads, all under a discreet, elegant sign, Miller Artisan Bakery and Kitchen. I'd overheard 2 women in Chanel walk by it. My God, Helen, one whispered, they're better than anything in Cherry Creek. My hobby was on full display. David and Elena had walked right past it when they made their grand entrance, their arms linked, so blinded by the spotlight they didn't even notice. I found my seat. Table 1, right at the foot of the stage. The philanthropist's wife. Mark Donovan was already there, playing the part of the proud fiancé and powerful chairman. He stood when I approached, his eyes as cold and hard as the diamonds on the women around us. He nodded. Just once. The trap was set. The D.A.'s men were here, in suits, posing as Donovan's corporate security. It was time. The lights dimmed. Elena, in a glittering silver dress, had just taken the stage to a thunderous, adoring round of applause. Tonight, she cooed, her voice like warm honey, we honor a man who truly embodies the spirit of giving. I slipped from my chair. No one noticed. I moved through the darkness at the edge of the room and pushed through the heavy curtain to go backstage. It was a different world back here. Technicians with headsets hurried past. The air was hot and smelled like dust and electrical wiring. I found the green room, just a small, curtained-off area with a mirror and a table of half-empty water bottles. David was there. He was pacing back and forth like a caged animal, his face pale and sweating under the harsh lights. He was in a brand-new, perfectly tailored tux. He was practicing his speech into the mirror. I am so humbled. No, that's weak. I am profoundly honored. I watched him for a full 10 seconds. This was the man who had sat next to me at my father's casket. The man who had patted me on the head and called my life's work a hobby. The man who had stolen $250,000 from me while I was reading a poem at a funeral. And he wasn't terrified of being caught. He was terrified of failing his audition. He was terrified of fumbling his lines in front of the mayor. The sheer, pathetic vanity of it all. It was the final, clarifying nail in his coffin. I stepped forward. The floor creaked. David. He spun around, his face a mask of raw irritation. What? "Oh, God, it's you." He snatched a paper towel and wiped his neck. "Took you long enough. Where have you been?" "Out front, schmoozing over your little cookies. I'm dying back here." He grabbed a bottle of water from the table, saw it was empty, and threw it down in disgust. I held out the fresh, cold bottle I'd brought for him. He snatched it from my hand, his eyes never meeting mine. He was staring at his own reflection in the mirror, trying to fix his bow tie. "Is my speech on the teleprompter?" he snapped. "Did you check it? I sent the final draft to the tech guys an hour ago. You were supposed to handle that." He was treating me like his assistant, the fragile wife, the non-issue. This was it, the last time. I smiled. It was a calm, cool, real smile, the smile of a baker who knows the bread is done. "I checked, David," I said, my voice soft and clear in the little room. "I made absolutely sure. Every single word is exactly where it should be." He grunted, turning back to the mirror, already lost in his own fantasy. Good. Just go sit down. I need to focus." "Break a leg, honey," I said. I turned and walked out of the green room. I walked past the stage manager who was shouting into his headset. I walked back toward the heavy curtain, but I didn't go through it. I looked across the vast, dark ballroom to the AV booth, a box of light high in the back wall. A man was in there, silhouetted against the control panel. He wasn't the house tech. He was Mark Donovan's head of security, a man who specialized in corporate counterintelligence. He had been my AV consultant for the past week. He saw me. I gave a single, slow, deliberate nod. He nodded back. The trap was armed. I pushed through the curtain just as Elena was saying, "A man whose generosity knows no bounds." I walked back to table 1, the sound of applause rising. Mark Donovan, the perfect gentleman, stood and pulled out my chair. I sat down. I smoothed the $4,800 silk dress over my lap. I picked up my champagne flute. On stage, Elena was beaming. "And now, please join me in welcoming our 2025 Man of the Year, my dear friend, David Miller." The spotlight hit David as he walked on stage, and the room exploded. He was a conquering hero. He drank in the applause, his arms spread wide, his face a perfect picture of humble arrogance. He walked straight to Elena. She met him center stage, and they embraced, a long, theatrical hug for the cameras. Then he kissed her a chaste, respectful kiss on the cheek that, to me, looked like a rattlesnake's bite. She handed him the heavy crystal award, the Man of the Year. He held it up, and the crowd went wild again. I sat at table 1, my hands perfectly still in my lap. I took a sip of champagne. It tasted like static. Mark Donovan, beside me, was a statue carved from granite. He was watching the stage, but his eyes were dead. He was just waiting. David stepped to the podium, his face glistening with sweat and victory. He leaned into the microphone, his smile so wide it looked like it must hurt. "Thank you," he said, his voice booming through the ballroom. "Thank you, Elena, for that incredible introduction, and thank you to the board, to this entire community. He looked down at the teleprompter, the little screen at his feet that was supposed to be feeding him his practiced, humble lines. He paused. His smile wavered. It didn't fall. It just froze. "I am," he repeated, his voice losing its confident ring. He squinted slightly. He was reading something he didn't recognize. "What?" he whispered, but the microphone caught it. The word echoed. "What?" A nervous titter went through the first few tables. He was fumbling. The Man of the Year was choking. And then Mark Donovan stood up. He didn't just stand. He rose, a full 6'4" of old money and absolute power. As the chairman of the board, all eyes snapped to him. "I believe," Mark said, his voice a low, lethal baritone that needed no microphone, "that Mr. Miller is reading the wrong speech." David looked at Mark, his face a cartoon of confusion. "Mark, the speech he should be reading," Mark continued, "is this one." He gestured to the AV booth, and on cue, the 2 enormous projection screens on either side of the stage, the ones that had been showing David's smiling, charitable face, flickered. They didn't go black. They were replaced with an image. My spreadsheet, the one from my fire safe. But my AV guy had given it a professional glow-up. It was a clean, brutal infographic. Source: Miller Family Trust. Grace Miller, sole beneficiary. Recipient: Apex Solutions Group, Dr. Swelv. Elena Ride, sole proprietor. Amount, $250,000. Date, August 14, 2:17 p.m. A collective, high-pitched gasp sucked the air out of the room. It was the sound of 1,000 people inhaling at once. "That's not his speech," Mark Donovan announced, his voice slicing through the silence. That is a wire transfer from his wife's inheritance, and as you can see by the date, it was sent during the hour of his father-in-law's funeral service. I watched David. His blood didn't just drain from his face, it was vacuumed out. He looked at the screen, at Mark, and then finally at me. His eyes were wide. He didn't look angry. He didn't look sorry. He looked confused. Like a child who doesn't understand a magic trick. "How did you do that?" I just held his gaze. I didn't smile. I just watched. Elena, on the stage, was the first to react. She grabbed the microphone from the podium. "There has been a terrible mistake," she said, her voice shaking but still trying for control. "Mark, what is this? This is slander. This is some technical error." "Is it, Dr. Reed?" Mark's voice was conversational. "A technical error? Then perhaps you can explain this one too." He nodded to the AV booth again, and the sound system of the Hyatt Regency, a system designed for orchestras, crackled to life. My $40 voice recorder, my living room. David's voice, thick with laughter, filled the ballroom. "God, she's just so fragile. She's a mess, still crying about her dad. She hasn't looked at a bank statement in months. She just signs what I tell her to sign. It's perfect." Someone in the back dropped a champagne flute. The shatter was the only sound in the room. And then, Elena's voice. That smooth, honeyed, charitable voice. "It's fine, baby. She's a non-issue. We just have to keep the Philanthropist of the Year narrative going. It's the perfect cover." David stumbled back, his hand over his mouth. He looked at Elena. This was a betrayal he hadn't planned on. But it wasn't over. The recording continued. "David, what about Mark? He's the chairman. Doesn't he see the books?" Elena's laugh, that light, airy, contemptuous sound. "Mark? Oh, please. Mark is so distracted by his new high-rise build, he wouldn't notice if I set the building on fire. He just signs what I tell him to sign. He's so busy playing king of the city he forgot who really runs the castle." The audio clicked off. The silence that followed was a living thing. It was heavy and absolute. Elena was staring at Mark Donovan, her face a gray, slack mask of pure horror. He was no longer her fiancé. He was her executioner. And now, it was my turn. I stood up. My chair made a soft scrape on the floor, a sound as loud as a cannon in the dead silent room. I placed my napkin on the table. I walked to the stage. I didn't run. I didn't storm it. I just walked. I used the little stairs at the side. The emerald green dress swished around my ankles. David saw me coming and flinched, holding up his hand. Grace, stop. We can talk about this. This isn't you." I walked right past him. I walked past Elena, who was frozen, her hand still on the microphone. I stood at the podium. I looked out at the sea of faces. The mayor, the city council, the Denver Business Journal reporter at the press table, who was typing so fast his fingers were a blur. I leaned into the microphone. "He's right," I said, my voice perfectly clear, perfectly calm. It didn't shake. "This isn't me. This is him." I turned to David. He was still holding the heavy crystal award, the Man of the Year. You said I should let a professional handle the finances," I said. "You said I was just a hobbyist. You told me not to stress my pretty head about it." I smiled. "So I took your advice, David. I let the professionals handle it." As if on cue, the main ballroom doors swung open. It wasn't hotel security. It was 2 uniformed Denver police officers, and behind them, 2 detectives in suits, the men from the DA's office. They walked in with purpose, their eyes locked on the stage. "My forensic accountant calls this embezzlement," I said, my voice dropping. "My lawyer calls it fraud. And the Denver district attorney, he calls it conspiracy to commit wire fraud, a felony." The officers were at the foot of the stage. They weren't rushing. They knew they had them. David finally looked at the award in his hand. He looked at the officers. He looked at me. And in that 1 second, he finally understood. He finally saw me. He dropped the award. It hit the stage and shattered. 1,000 pieces of crystal exploded across the floor, skittering off the edge and into the stunned silence. And that, finally, is when the screaming began. The screaming was Elena's. It was a high, thin animal sound that didn't even sound human. It was the shriek of a queen bee being dethroned, and it was the sound that finally broke the spell. The ballroom, frozen in a silent collective gasp, exploded into chaos. People weren't just standing. They were knocking over chairs, scrambling to get a better view. 1,000 cell phones lit up the room, a constellation of little white rectangles all pointed at the stage, all recording. The Denver Business Journal reporter at the press table wasn't just typing. He was live streaming, his face a mask of predatory glee. The 2 uniformed officers were on stage, moving with a calm, methodical purpose that cut through the hysteria. One went to David, one to Elena. "Dr. Reed, you need to come with us." Elena recoiled, her hands flying up. "Get your hands off me," she shrieked. "Do you know who I am? Mark, tell them. Tell them to stop this. It's a lie." I watched Mark Donovan. He was still standing at table 1, a granite statue in a tuxedo. He just watched her, his face completely, terrifyingly blank. Then, as her voice reached a desperate, glass-shattering pitch, he did the coldest, most brutal thing I have ever seen. He sat down. He picked up his water glass, took a sip, and placed it back on the white linen tablecloth. He had just signed her death warrant with his silence. David was easier. He'd gone limp. The man of the year had evaporated, leaving a damp, hollow shell. He was just staring at the shattered crystal at his feet, the microphone at the podium hissing with empty feedback. "Sir, hands behind your back." "Grace," he whispered, his voice cracking. He looked at me, his eyes wide and begging. "Grace, please, don't. My father-in-law, he loved me." That was his last move, his final, pathetic play, to invoke the name of the man he robbed during his funeral. I just looked at him. I didn't say a word. I let him see my eyes. I let him see that the fragile wife was gone, and the person looking back at him was someone he had never met, someone he had created. The officers cuffed them. They put the silver, clicking handcuffs on Elena's wrists, right over the glittering diamond bracelet she was wearing. They cuffed David in his Man of the Year tuxedo. They read them their Miranda rights right there, under the spotlights, as 1,000 cell phones documented every second of their humiliation. As they were led off the stage, David passed me. His face, which had been white with shock, was now a deep, mottled purple with rage. "You did this," he hissed, the words spitting from his mouth. You, Baker, you ruined me." "No, David," I said, my voice quiet, just for him, but as clear as a bell. "I just let you show everyone who you really are. You did the rest yourself." I watched them get walked through the stunned, silent crowd. The perp walk of the year, right past the mayor, right past the city council, right past the donors they'd schmoozed and the colleagues they'd lied to. The dream was over. The arrest was the public victory. The next part. That was the personal one. 2 weeks later. The story had been on the front page of the Denver Post for 7 straight days. Gala of the damned, the philanthropist and the fraud. Elena was out on bail, her career vaporized. The Empowerment Fund was in receivership, and Mark Donovan was heading the internal investigation, which was like letting the wolf investigate the henhouse. He was scorching the earth. David was also out on bail. He'd had to borrow money from a college roommate, and he was sitting across from me, not in a glass tower, but in a small, beige, windowless conference room at my lawyer's office. The air smelled like burnt coffee and recycled paper. He wasn't in a tux. He was wearing a cheap suit, the kind you buy off the rack for a last-minute job interview. It was rumpled, his face was puffy, and his hands were shaking. "Grace," he started, his voice trying for that old, reasonable tone. The supportive husband voice. This is all just a nightmare. You know this is insane. We can fix this. You can go to the DA. You can tell them you were confused, that you were grieving, you weren't thinking straight." He was still doing it. Even now, he was trying to use my grief as his get-out-of-jail-free card. I didn't say anything. I just reached into my leather briefcase, the one I'd bought with my bakery money, and pulled out a thick, neatly bound stack of papers. I slid it across the table. The sound it made was heavy, final. "What's this?" he asked, his voice weary. "That," I said, "is our divorce. Signed, sealed, and just waiting for your signature." He laughed. It was a short, bitter, barking sound. "A divorce? You think I'm thinking about a divorce? I'm facing prison, Grace. And you're, what, dividing up the house?" "The house is already divided," I said. "It's mine." His head snapped up, his eyes suddenly sharp. "What? That's our house. This is Colorado, Grace. We're a 50/50 community property state. I get half." "We are," I said, my voice as calm as the day I'd served him water backstage. "But you and I don't have 50/50 assets anymore. I'm keeping the house. It's in the agreement." "I'll never sign that. I'll fight you. I'll take you to court. I'll take half," he snarled. "Half of what, David?" I leaned forward. "Half of the bakery? Grace's hobby? That's a sole proprietorship, registered in my name, with my own seed money from before we were married. You can't touch it. The house," he insisted, his voice cracking. "The house, which my father's inheritance was paying the mortgage on. The inheritance you stole. My lawyer is very, very good, and she's made the case a case. The D.A. agrees with that. You've already taken your share, and then some." I'll take the savings," he said, his voice getting desperate. "The stock accounts, my portfolio." I just shook my head. "What stock accounts, David?" My portfolio, my personal accounts, my 401k. "Oh, David," I said, and for a flicker of a second I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. "You didn't read the DAS filing, did you? The one Mark Donovan's legal team helped fast-track." I slid a second, thinner document across the table. It was from the district attorney's office. "The DA has frozen all your assets, your personal accounts, your retirement accounts, your Project Elevate slush fund, all of it. It's fruit of the poisonous tree, David. It's evidence in a massive, ongoing fraud investigation. You can't touch a dime." He stared at the paper. His face, which had been puffy and red, was now the color of old oatmeal. He looked up at me, and the last bit of fight just whooshed out of him. He was completely, utterly hollowed out. You're leaving me with nothing," he whispered. "No, David," I said, standing up. I picked up my briefcase. "I'm not leaving you with nothing. I'm leaving you with exactly what you earned." "You can't, Grace, please. I loved you. You loved the idea of me," I said, my hand on the doorknob. "You loved the fragile, grieving girl you could pat on the head. You just never, ever thought to look at the woman standing next to you." I opened the door. "Sign the papers, David. It's the only deal you're going to get. Your criminal trial is next. And unlike me, the D.A. is not in a forgiving mood." I walked out of the beige room and left him there, in that cheap suit, with nothing but a pen and the ruins of the life he'd burned to the ground himself. The D.A. wasn't forgiving. 6 months later, probation wasn't even on the table. David was facing 5 to 7 for conspiracy and wire fraud. His Man of the Year award was now Exhibit A for the prosecution, a perfect symbol of his arrogance. Elena, the pillar of the community, got 8 to 10. It turned out my case had just been the tip of the iceberg. Mark Donovan's internal audit found she'd been skimming from the fund for years, long before David ever came into the picture. They were both going to federal, white-collar prison. But it was still prison. The day their sentences came down, I didn't celebrate. I didn't even feel relieved. I just worked. I was in my bakery. But it wasn't the bakery from 6 months ago. It wasn't the small, cute shop David had tolerated. It was more. I'd knocked down the wall into the nail salon next door. I had a new 20-foot glass pastry case. I had 3 new, massive, steam-injected deck ovens humming in the back, imported from Italy. We had a line out the door, not just on weekends, but on Tuesdays. Miller Artisan Bakery and Kitchen was no longer a hobby. It was a brand. We were the #1 rated bakery in Denver, and a food magazine in Boulder had just called us a culinary landmark. I was wiping down the new marble countertop, the end of the Saturday rush finally slowing, when the bell over the door chimed. It was Mark Donovan. I hadn't seen him since the gala. He looked different. He wasn't in his 50th floor, king of the world suit. He was wearing a simple, expensive cashmere sweater and slacks. He looked smaller, somehow more human. He stood there awkwardly, looking a little lost amidst the smell of yeast and espresso. "Miss Miller," he said, nodding. "Mr. Donovan," I replied. I dried my hands on my apron. "My hobby uniform. Coffee. Please." I poured him a black coffee in one of my ceramic mugs, the ones with the bakery's logo. He took a sip and looked around. "You've been busy," he said. It was an understatement. "I like building things," I said. "It's in my blood." He nodded, taking another sip. He pulled an envelope from his jacket pocket and placed it on the counter, next to a cooling rack of sourdough boules. It was a thick, bank-sized envelope. "This is the final cashier's check," he said. "I've liquidated all of Elena's assets from the fund, as well as the Apex and Reed accounts. The board approved the motion. It's everything your father left you, plus damages. And interest, a lot of interest." He was, in his own way, apologizing. He was balancing the books. I looked at the envelope. It was the end. The final, tangible proof. My father's legacy. Returned. Mark stared into his coffee cup. "I've been a developer for 30 years, Miss Miller. I read 1,000-page contracts for a living. I can spot a loophole from a mile away. I thought I was untouchable." He shook his head, a small, bitter movement. "And she played me. She played me for years. That recording. So busy playing king of the city he forgot who really runs the castle." He looked at me, his eyes sharp. "I still feel like a fool. A billion-dollar fool." I stopped wiping the counter. I turned to face him, leaning back against my ovens. They were still warm. "You're not a fool, Mr. Donovan," I said. You made the same mistake they did." "What's that?" "You underestimated the person standing right in front of you. They did it to you, and they did it to me. They counted on you seeing a charity director you were sleeping with, and they counted on David seeing a grieving wife he was sleeping with." I picked up a bag of flour, my 50-pound bag, and easily hoisted it onto the stainless steel prep table. "They thought I was just a baker," I said. My voice was quiet, but it filled the space. "They thought I was a hobbyist. They thought all I did was play with dough." I scooped some flour onto the table, a white, soft cloud. "They forgot what baking is." I looked at him. "It's not magic. It's not a hobby. It's chemistry. It's math. It's biology." I pointed to the back wall, to the massive, bubbling tub of our sourdough starter, the heirloom, the one my dad had loved. "That's my starter," I said. "It's 150 years old. It's a living thing, and it's more honest than any person I've ever met. It can't be lied to. It can't be rushed. It doesn't care about your feelings, or your portfolio, or what gala you're going to. It just demands precision." I dipped my hand into the flour. They thought I was a non-issue. They thought I was too fragile to read a balance sheet. But for the last 10 years, I've been running a lab. I control temperatures. I manage variables. I weigh ingredients to the gram. I follow a precise formula. I met his eyes. "And I never rush the proofing. You have to be patient. You have to let the gluten develop. You have to let the yeast do its work, right up until the moment you put it in a 500-degree oven." I brushed the flour from my hands. "They just weren't patient enough," I said. "They weren't precise enough, and they never, ever thought to check the temperature of the woman who was feeding them." Mark Donovan was silent for a long time. He looked from the starter, to the ovens, to me. He finally understood. He drained his coffee cup and stood up, buttoning his sweater. "You're not a baker, Miss Miller," he said. It wasn't what he'd said in his office. It wasn't a question. It was a statement. "I am," I said, smiling a little. "I'm just a very, very good one." He put a $20 bill on the counter. "For the coffee?" "It's on the house, Mr. Donovan." "No," he said, pushing it forward. "Pay yourself what you're worth. I've learned my lesson." He nodded at me, a final gesture of respect, and walked out of my bakery, the bell chiming his exit. I picked up the $20 bill, and I put it in the tip jar for my baristas. I looked at the check on the counter, my father's check, and for the first time since he died, I finally, truly, let out a breath. That breath I took, standing in my bakery with my father's check in my hand, was the first clean one I'd taken in months. It was the end of the poisoning. It was the end of the grief. I didn't frame the check. I didn't celebrate with champagne. I deposited it. And I put every single cent of my father's legacy, plus the damages, plus the crippling interest Mark Donovan's legal team had tacked on, right back into the only thing that had ever been real: building. 1 year later, the air was crisp, a bright, cold Denver autumn morning. I was standing on a cobblestone sidewalk in Cherry Creek North. This is the neighborhood in Denver. It's where the old money and the new tech money collide. It's a land of art galleries, valet parking, and designer boutiques. It was the neighborhood David had always talked about, the one he was always trying to leverage his way into. It was the world Elena had pretended to own. I was standing there, in tailored wool slacks and a sharp blazer, holding a hot coffee. My coffee. From my shop. A man on a tall ladder was securing the last brushed bronze letter to a gleaming black onyx sign. It wasn't a cute, folksy sign. It was severe, elegant, and confident. Miller Artisan. Just my name. Just the work. This was my second location. But it wasn't just a shop. It was a statement. It was an embassy. I looked through the floor-to-ceiling glass. This wasn't a hobby shop. It was a 7,000-square-foot bi-level culinary destination. It had a full-service kitchen, a wine bar, and a line of people already waiting for the 10 a.m. opening, even though we were still 2 days from launch. My forensic accountant, Mr. Klein, the man who had smelled the rat in the first place, was now my part-time CFO. My lawyer had helped me incorporate. I had 42 employees, a benefits package, and a payroll that made David's old Philanthropist of the Year salary look like a rounding error. In the very center of the store, I'd had them build a glass-walled, temperature-controlled room, a sanctuary. Inside, lit like a priceless piece of art in a museum, sat the heirloom, my 150-year-old sourdough starter. It was the heart of the business. It was the one thing that was real, the thing that couldn't be faked, the thing that had outlived wars and depressions and my own personal apocalypse. It was the true chairman of the board. I thought about David and Elena. They'd been in their separate, low-security federal prisons for 3 months. I'd heard he was working in the kitchen. The irony wasn't lost on me. I thought about the green dress. The $4,800 dress. I still had it. It was in a box in my storage unit, along with a laminated copy of the $250,000 wire transfer. Not as a trophy, as a receipt. A receipt for the most expensive and most valuable lesson of my life. Never let anyone else tell you what you're worth. Never let them dress you up, pat you on the head, and call you a non-issue. They had called me a hobbyist wife. They had called me fragile. They thought I was a side note, an obstacle in their big, important, sociopathic story. They didn't realize they were just villains in mine. They tried to take my inheritance, the one thing my father left me. So I took their freedom, the one thing they couldn't buy back. The man on the ladder climbed down, wiping his hands on his jeans. "All set, boss," he called out. Boss. I smiled. I liked that word. It fit better than wife ever had. I stepped back and looked up at the sign. My name. In bronze. Built to last. I looked at my reflection in the window. The woman looking back wasn't the fragile girl who had cried at her father's funeral. She wasn't the naive wife who had signed the papers. She was precise. She was strong. She was a woman who knew, down to the gram, exactly what she was made of. She was a builder, just like her dad. So, let me ask you, when your world burns to the ground and all you're left with is the smoke and the ashes, what will you build? If this story resonated with you, let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We read every one. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories about finding your strength when you thought it was gone.